must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeremy Mohler, a writer and meditation teacher in Washington, D.C., and this is Meditation for the Masses, where I take meditation out of faraway monasteries, expensive retreat centers, and corporate America, and bring it to things that matter most to people who work for a living. That would be work, relationships, and politics. I like to call it mindfulness for the hustle and the class struggle. On this episode, I'm going to try to convince you that you should meditate, even if it sometimes feels difficult. Please take a moment right now, first though, to hit pause and rate Meditation for the Masses on Apple Podcasts or whatever app you're using. And as always, please stick around to the end. There's a little spiel there at the end if you haven't heard it about my writing and my meditation teaching and other aspects of what I got out there. Thank you for listening. So this is the question that I want to dig into today. Why meditate if it's a difficult thing to do? Life is already hard, right? For most of us, especially in a capitalist society. The vast majority of people in such a society are only valued for our time, our energy, that thing that we get paid for in our paycheck, also known as our labor, and not for our creativity and passion. Very little of that gets to be used. We get to use very little of those things in our jobs. And some people are lucky enough to, quote unquote, do what they love. But simply the way that the economy is designed in a capitalist society, and this is what the wisdom or the insight that Karl Marx had and why it's so powerful, the vast majority of us just can't do that simply. We have to work for someone else, take orders from someone else to pay the bills. And even that doesn't buy us the stability and community and the free time, all the free time that we all yearn for as human beings. You know, markets crash. There's always some sort of crises on the horizon. The rent keeps going up. We feel like we're falling further and further behind. So why waste the little bit of free time we do have outside of work and between taking care of our families and feeding ourselves? Why not veg out, watching Netflix or doing something else that feels relaxing or at least seems relaxing, where we can sort of turn our minds off? Why do something that feels difficult sometimes? And meditation certainly can feel that way at times. And the answer has to do with suffering, which isn't exactly the most sexy topic, although I will argue in this that suffering is at the core of why meditation is so powerful. And just so we're on the same page here, you'll hear me say this a lot on multiple episodes of this podcast, and if you read my writing, I try to make this point over and over again because it really opened things up for me when I first learned it. And that is that suffering is different than pain. Pain is what you feel when you get the flu, or you sprain an ankle, or someone breaks your heart. It can be physical pain, it can be emotional pain, and there's no way around this pain. It's just a reality. It's what you're going through. But suffering is when we try to get around that pain, when we try to avoid it, when we even deny that we feel it. We might feel suffering as a lingering sense that something is wrong or a little off. You might spend some days like this. In fact, earlier today, I felt this way, that I just wasn't getting enough work done. I just couldn't really get out of this sort of restless mindset where I felt like I needed to do something, but I didn't know what that was, but I just couldn't get up from the chair. And I just felt a little off. And when we feel this lingering sense of offness, oftentimes our minds go into storytelling mode, and our minds go haywire. and we churn stories of why we feel that way, or also what's wrong with feeling that sense of offness. And this usually only adds fuel to the fire. So suffering is, another way to put suffering is, it's the story that we attach to the pain that is inevitable in our lives. It's inevitable that our heart is going to be broken at some point, that we're going to lose someone that we love closely, or that who is close to us, we're going to lose them in our lives. We're going to stub a toe, whatever it is. But it's not inevitable that we attach all these stories to those losses and to that pain. One example of, you can really see this in the end of relationships. You can see someone that has had their heart broken and they get into a blame game, right? It's her fault, it's my fault that the relationship ended. And it's useful to think about, to learn lessons from an experience of a relationship ending. But if you spend months and months and months and maybe even years in sort of this blame game in your head, it's clearly not the most wise way to move on from a relationship ending. So I want to bring in a quote here from Ajahn Chah. That's Ajahn Chah. A lot of H's in there. He was a Thai Buddhist monk who has passed now. And this is what he wrote. There are two kinds of suffering. The suffering that leads to more suffering, and the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. If you are not willing to face the second kind of suffering, you will surely continue to experience the first. So the story that we attach to the pain is the sort of suffering that leads to more suffering. It's that first type of suffering that Ajahn Chah was talking about. So again, trying to figure out who is to blame for a broken heart, instead of just accepting that the heart is broken and that's what's happened and that's the pain that you're feeling in that time. Here's another example that's a little bit less intense than the relationship one. So right in the middle of a 7-day silent meditation retreat that I did a few months ago now, I started to feel some sharp pain in my lower back. It wasn't super strong pain that would have sidelined me from meditating and I needed to leave the retreat center or anything like that. But it was just this lingering, burning, sharp pain that would pop up a few hours into each day of meditating, because we were essentially meditating most of the day. And each day, so maybe the second day from then on, I spent a good 3 or 4 hours there suffering, and not because of the pain. I think in the moment I did think it was about the pain, but looking back it wasn't. It was because of all the stories that I was inventing that made that pain a problem. I would go through the storyline of like, I'm not a good meditator. I can't handle this. I've been meditating for every day for going on 5-6 years, whatever it is at this point. And how can I not just sit here, and my back isn't strong enough at this point of doing it every day. I'm a meditation teacher. I shouldn't have pain when I sit. How am I going to be a good teacher if I have pain? Maybe I'm really not cut out for this after all. This was the kind of these were the stories and the thoughts that were kind of gushing up in response to that pain. At the moment, I was caught up in them. I didn't see them as attached to that pain, more or less. I just saw them, those were my ways of kind of just getting away from the pain for a while, distracting myself. Which is fine, of course, but I think there's a lesson here. So once I started noticing those stories, so it was a few days in, I stopped resisting the pain in my back. The pain became interesting itself. And this sounds odd, but it was interesting the way that the pain would fluctuate as I sat there. I didn't even move, right? I was just kind of putting my attention on my lower back. And instead of a problem, I started to become curious about that pain, which sounds a little masochistic, but just bear with me. And I noticed that all it was a little bit of heat that was throbbing up and down, and it was sort of following my breath. So I'd breathe in, and it would get a little bit more intense, and I'd breathe out, and it would kind of fade. And then minutes would go by, and it would eventually fade to nothing, and then it would kind of creep back in as a little bit more fire. It was never so much that I couldn't handle. I could sit there and kind of handle it and just stay with it and ride it ride it like a wave. And I think the lesson here is that as soon as I saw those thoughts for what they were, I no longer was caught up in those stories. The pain became interesting, something I could be curious about rather than evidence of me being weak or a fake teacher or something like that. So to the point of this whole episode, meditation itself is suffering. But we get to do it in a comfortable, safe environment. Another way to put that is it turns suffering into a means towards learning how to suffer less. That second type of suffering that Ajahn Chah was talking about. And this is because we take away distractions. We take away our phone. We can't pick that up. We aren't reading books. We aren't watching TV. We don't have anyone else to talk to when we're meditating. All the things that we use to escape being present to whatever we're feeling, whether it's pain or pleasure. And we actually just have to sit there and feel the things. Feel all the things, right? Feel all the feels. And yes, there's lots of pleasure in our experience, but there's also going to be moments where you feel anger, fear, anxiety, or even just bored. There's actually a lot of boredom in meditation. So meditation is basically forcing ourselves to sit down and stay with whatever sensations and emotions come up. And one thing that comes up no matter what, every time, and this is just part of being a human being, and it actually has a name for it, is resistance to what is, resistance to reality. And we can call this ego. We don't want to feel that pain in our back, and that sort of makes sense. Or more precisely, we think that our pain in our back is a problem, and that we're doing something wrong or we're weak. We don't want to have angry thoughts about a coworker that may have pissed us off yesterday. Or maybe we just want to stay in those angry thoughts and indulge them in a little fantasy world. We don't want the flu, right? We don't want to feel jealous when our girlfriend, boyfriend, partner is talking to someone else and seems to be enjoying themselves. We don't want to feel that jealousy. Just sit there. And anytime you're resisting what is actually happening, that your heart hurts, that you're angry, that you have the flu, that's suffering. Another way to define quote-unquote mindfulness, a sort of buzzword attached to meditation, is noticing all the little ways you try to resist reality. So, if I asked you, would you rather spend 20 or 30 minutes mildly suffering right now, or spend the rest of the day suffering at the whims of everything that's out of your control, which is pretty much everything? Which would you take? That's it. I'm just going to leave you with that question. Just hang it out there. Think about it. I'm out of here. Stick around for some more info about my writing and meditation, and I'll see you next time. A few things before you get on with your day. Make sure you're subscribed to Meditation for the Masses on iTunes or whatever app you use for podcasts. That's so you won't miss an episode. If you want more from me, sign up for my weekly email on meditation at jeremymohler.blog/signup. My website also has free recordings of guided meditations and when and where I teach meditation in person. I generally teach in the Washington, D.C. area, but hope to expand my reach in the near future. And finally, please rate this episode on whatever app you use to listen to it. You might not realize how important that is. I spent years loving podcasts like The Tim Ferriss Show and The Dig without ever actually rating them, even though their host would ask me to rate them on every episode. Ratings make podcast apps recommend Meditation for the Masses to folks looking for podcasts on meditation. So it's really important to me. I deeply appreciate you listening. Thank you.